We are, we are delighted to have the first panel of this summit be a panel of rabbis. In fact, to our knowledge, this is the first panel of rabbis on impact investing maybe ever. So, but it makes sense. In the field, as Julie just mentioned, the field of impact investing or values-based investing, we start with our values. And so I'm really honored to get to hear from these rabbis, these spiritual and faith leaders from across the Jewish spectrum about business and investment as a force for good. Truth is, Judaism has thousands of years of wisdom on this topic. Of the 613 commandments in the Torah, over 100 relate to business, money, and ethics. So we're going to get started by bringing you all into the conversation through a text study. The texts are up on the screen, and you can also find them on our website if you navigate to jlensnetwork.org and click the text button. We have a few hard copies floating around if you need, and our staff will be circulating. So in just a moment, I'm going to invite you to turn to a neighbor, maybe somebody you don't know yet, to introduce yourself and to form a pair. And in your pair, I'm going to invite you to select 2 or 3 of these texts and to read them out loud and to discuss them. So we'll have a few minutes, so feel free to go at your own pace. And go ahead, please turn to a neighbor, introduce yourself, form a pair, and discuss these texts. Thank you. So I am delighted to introduce this panel of rabbis. We have Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, an Orthodox rabbi and founding president of Klal, and also a mentor of mine. Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld, a conservative rabbi and CEO of the Rabbinical Assembly, the international rabbinic body for conservative and Masorti rabbis. We have Rabbi Aaron Penkin, a Reform rabbi and president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, a premier training institute for Reform rabbis. So I'd like to start by asking you all the big question. As Julie mentioned, this summit is about the why. Why should the Jewish community be engaging in this field? Why should we as Jews care not just about the financial return of our investments, but the impact they are making on the world? As your thoughts as rabbis and as spiritual leaders. So I'll turn to you, Rabbi Greenberg, first.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here with such distinguished colleagues, leaders in their movement, and really happy to be here at such an important occasion. I believe at the heart of Judaism is a vision of world transformation, perfection really, which we talk about in common contemporary parlance as tikkun olam. The Jewish messianic vision is utopian, idealistic, in some ways maybe beyond realism, and it really envisions a total transformation, and that includes, bluntly, all the enemies of dignity and life, and that specifically includes, therefore, not just spiritual enemies, but poverty, hunger, war, sickness, the enemies of human capacity, human life, human dignity. So in a very real sense, what's most interesting to me, and this is what I feel is the heart of being Jewish, it's an intergenerational covenant or partnership. How you're going to accomplish total world transformation, how you're going to overcome war, overcome hunger, overcome poverty. The answer is it will take a multi-generational, that's what we're about, effort, and that always fascinated me. You marry a kind of an ideal socialist, if you will, utopian vision with a very pragmatic, self-interested, very human, incremental direction, which we call Brit covenant, and express itself in Jewish law and Jewish tradition. So the heart of it seems to me, what brings me here very simply is, I think it's this combination. For example, again, the Torah, on the one hand, it's clear its vision is socialist. On Shemitah, the sabbatical year, all private property is suspended and anybody can come in and take the food of the land. On Yovel, every 50 years you redistribute all the land and equally to every family, so that in fact you will have an economic equality structure. Having said that, the Torah turns right around, accepts private property, recognizes it, affirms in fact the mitzvah of tzedakah, which is a balance to the inequality that clearly comes. So it's this combination, it seems to me, of a vision that's willing to work with human limits and human realities and move people step by step. And that's what brings me to JLens and to this conference. It seems to me we have seen in the last 100 years particularly that the self-interested, the self-driven, if you will, selfish private property structure is far more productive, far more creative of wealth, far more powerful in overcoming poverty than any other system, and that we affirm, that we accept. But again, the heart of it is that you see you're part of this intergenerational long-term goal, and you try to move the productive, the investment, the economic self-interest toward a better world, toward increasing and enhancing human dignity, toward overcoming poverty without destroying and eroding the world we live in. And that, it seems to me, is therefore, JLens has come at the right moment at the right time. It represents a kind of a reassertion of this Jewish combination of looking to transform the world one step at a time, looking to perfect and to improve the behavior of the society without the kind of war, radical redistribution, class conflict, confrontation, destructive, which turns out to be not a very efficient method and not a very efficient way. So my feeling is that this is a moment in which the Union really has given this wonderful direction, how you can not only do good, but do well, not only do well, but do good, how a community can really transform the world one step at a time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Greenberg. Rabbi Schoenfeld?
Thank you. So I'm going to follow Rabbi Greenberg's incredibly lofty and inspiring remarks with a much more mundane set of comments. I sit here as both the head of a professional organization of rabbis, Jewish professionals, 1,700, and also as the trustee of one of our community's pension funds. I sit on the board of the Joint Retirement Board of the Conservative Movement, which handles the retirement investments not only of our rabbis and cantors, but educators, and in fact, many people who are not Jewish, who work within our synagogues and other institutions. And so I am profoundly in touch with the tension that this important question raises and the goods that we are struggling with. In my capacity as chief executive of the Rabbinical Assembly, I send a series of checks to widows every month, women whose husbands were among the most exalted rabbis of their generation, who do not have nearly enough to get by and live in their old age. And I was shocked to find, so you may be shocked to find as well, that many of those greats of the middle and late part of the 20th century of the conservative movement, those famous voices, lived in their retirement with completely insufficient monies. They didn't have a house. They didn't have a retirement fund. And so we're very blessed that at certain top echelons of the profession, people, are earning a professional income. But remember, as I said, many of our depositors in the fund are school teachers, earning very, very, insufficient amounts of money. And so when we look at making sure that we are ensuring their investments and giving them the best possible choices, it is truly a very Jewish endeavor. To care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, Aniye Ircha Kodem, that you must take care of the needy of your own place first. And at the same time, the very same people who are so idealistic, and many other people who I'm sure are not only are approaching me, but are approaching our colleagues and who sit in this room and approach you, I find that the need for people, all people, regular people, to be able to express our values in our lives and to have a sense of agency in an effective way, that we can not only be a part of, first of all, a fabulous gathering like this, a civil community of civil discourse where we can struggle with important issues and try to learn, but so that people can actually feel that in their own lives, these values that they hold dear, they're not just shaking their heads, but that they're actually able to do something, right? And to get together with some form of collective action. And so that need is existential, right? It's not as if we can just leave this question unanswered, right? They are coming to us. They must have a way to feel that through their choices, that they can be a part of seeing the Jewish values that are the fabric of their lives really left behind for their children and really come to something. And so it is a profoundly important gathering that we are at today as we really try to learn more and make the best, most informed choices we can about these goods, multiple goods. I won't call them competing goods, but multiple goods, all of which we must achieve.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Schoenfeld. Rabbi Penkin.
So first of all, I'm really delighted to be part of what I consider to be a new startup, Rabbinic panels at investing conferences. And I want to say we're doing our A round fundraising right now. So if you're interested, we'd love to welcome you into that. So I want to say three things as really a set of opening comments in terms of thinking about this, in addition to the wonderful words of my colleagues on this panel, and I'm really delighted to be with them today. The three things go like this. The first is, I think Judaism really, since its beginning, has had the concept of impact investing built into it and baked into it. I'm going to give you one example of that. There's a concept called peah, which the Torah talks about, and the Mishnah and the Talmud eventually develop, which is the idea of taking the corner of your field. Peyot, by the way, you may connect to that word. Those are the corners of your beard, but we're talking about the corners of a field. And the Mishnah and the Talmud say you have to take 1/60th of your field, if you're a farmer, and you have to give it over to the poor and indigent. Why is that an interesting thing when you connect it to impact investing? Well, I'll tell you why. What it means is, at the most important moment of harvest in a society, when the poor are feeling most disenfranchised, when they are feeling most pushed aside, when they cannot participate in the joy they feel all around them in society from people who are doing well, that is the moment when you have to think about the power of sharing, the power of helping an individual. And it's not a handout. What it is it's an invitation to participate in the harvest process, to participate in taking what is left in the fields and using it for yourself, not just for the landowner who could say all of this is mine, but actually so that the individual, every individual in the world, Jew, non-Jew, doesn't make a difference, is part of that process. So the goal here is to share what you have, not as a handout, but as a partnership. And the other interesting point about that, before I move on to my second point, is to remind you that the Talmud actually says, if you take from those corners of the field as a landowner and you eat that yourself, you're actually stealing. It actually belongs to the poor. So there is, in a sense, a kind of tikkun, a reparation that is taking place here of giving away something that's yours because it's not really yours. It's a sense of stewardship for others. Second point, Deuteronomy 12:28, one of my favorite verses in the Torah, although I really like all of them, I have to say. Most of them, actually. There's a couple we could talk about that. Anyway, the Deuteronomy 12:28 has a beautiful juxtaposition. On the one hand, it says you should do all the mitzvot that God wants you to do. God has told you what to follow, all of that. But then all of a sudden, it comes along and it says you have to do something else in addition to that. And what it says is you have to do hatov v'hayashar. You must do what is good and what is straightforward or right. The idea here is that in every generation, we have to struggle both with the obligation of what it means to be connected to the Jewish community, to do what we perceive God's will to be, but then also to go beyond that. It's not simply enough to slavishly adhere to commandments. It's not simply enough to enact Jewish tradition the way the Torah or later tradition follows it. You actually have to do what is good and what is right in your society. And that, to me, is one of the ways that Jews and other religious folks and other ethical folks in the world really distinguish themselves, because they don't just sit upon their religious tradition and do what it has always said. They think about what it means to apply it, to make it happen in the world in an ongoing basis. Last comment. Jews have often been countercultural. We have often stood for things that the rest of culture hasn't stood for. At times, that's been incredibly wonderful for us intellectually, academically. At other times, it's been actually quite damaging to us, and we've been persecuted and annihilated over time because of the differences that we have. And I think what is important to me right now, when I look around the world and I see what's happening and I see the developments constantly in our society and elsewhere, is we should be countercultural. We should be standing up again for what is right and what is good, even when it's risky, even when it's difficult, even when we may suffer a bit of loss. There is an opportunity here for us to do what is important in the world. And as the world gets more challenging, that opportunity gets more risky, but it also gets far more meaningful. And I hope we will stand up to that challenge.
Great. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'd like to now, we're going to hear from these three rabbis about the texts that we all studied. So I'd like to start with Rabbi Penkin and this first text up on the screen. Can you share your reflections on this text and what it says to us in this question of impact investing?
Certainly, thank you. So the first text we're talking about is a text from Talmud Shabbat 63a, where it says, Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, one who loans another money is greater than one who gives him charity, and the one who enters into a business partnership with a needy person is the greatest of them all. So one of the things I do, I'm actually a professor of Talmud at Hebrew Union College before I became president and took on this day job. And one of the interesting things that we tend to do is we look back to the origins of a text and we look back to the ideas and where it came from, and then we look forward to its application. That's really a wonderful way to look at Talmudic text. So the backstory on this text is the idea from Deuteronomy 15, where it says, if, however, there's a needy person among you, one of your kinspeople in any of your settlements in the land that God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinspeople. Rather, you must open your hand, and here's where it gets interesting, and lend the needy person sufficient for his or her needs. So listen to that last part of the sentence one more time. Lend the needy person sufficient for his or her needs. So the interesting thing about this text is it's actually a loan. You're not actually giving tzedakah in this instance. And most of Jewish tzedakah is actually based originally on this idea of loaning something to someone. There are not a lot of commandments that say you must give. There are a lot of commandments that talk about loaning and a lot of commandments that talk about partnership. So the text here is prioritizing this idea of loaning for a couple of reasons. Notice a few things about what the text says. First, kinspeople come first, but not, if you're not a kinsperson, if you're not part of our community, you can still be helped. So the idea is help your family, help the local people, help the people close to you, but don't forget to help the people farther away in the world. Second, microloaning is actually a Jewish idea. It's an ancient Jewish idea, this idea of giving someone a loan so they can do something in the world, and that actually creates the opportunity for them to grow, not simply through a handout, but actually through the possibility of them creating new capital for themselves. So Rashi suggests two reasons, and this is what I think a very interesting part of this text. Why is a loan greater than a gift? Well, Rashi says a loan is less embarrassing to a needy person. In other words, if you say to someone, I would like to enter a partnership with you, I'd like to give you a loan, you're saying to them, I have the faith and the confidence that you know how to do something, and that I'm going to support that, and as I support that, that gives you the opportunity to grow. If you give someone a gift, the gift, in a sense, says, this gift is because I know you can't do it yourself. So Rashi would suggest to us that tzedakah is important, and I'm not trying to downplay the need for tzedakah. It is important, and gifts are important. But on the other hand, it's a higher value to actually loan someone, to give them the opportunity to raise themselves up. Another reason, people will generally, Rashi says, lend more money than they will gift. If you think you're going to get your loan back, you will be more generous. You will actually give people more money to allow them to do more in the world. But the business partnership, the third piece here, is actually the most important, and that's what the Talmud says is the right way to do it. And it's an interesting set of words here. It says, metal bakis, that you should place the money into a purse, which means a communal purse. So you're actually investing, in a sense, in that community, in that person, and giving them the ability to then take that money, invest it, and come out in a better place. So the idea here is to provide capital for the needy person to trade with, and let him or her pay you back, but keep the profits. So you've enabled them to actually go out, do what they needed to do, and you also then get the money back. That's actually a wonderful kind of way to do it. So the principles behind this are the following, and I think with this I would conclude about this text. We want to lessen the embarrassment of the individuals we work with, as Rashi said. We want to increase access and participation in the markets. We want to meet the needs of the needy through giving them access, through creating opportunity for them to invest. We want to maximize the access to working capital for everyone, but it may not actually maximize the return received by the loaner. In fact, it may decrease that by definition, because not every loan, as we've learned over the years, comes back. You don't always get every loan repaid. So there's a certain amount of risk that you're taking on that loan may not come back to you. And finally, we think about the values that are inherent in this. And I would suggest, as I sort of take this text and move it to the current situation, that it's also important for us to think about the values of what the money supports. So, for example, does it help the environment? Does it help egalitarianism and pluralism and democracy in the world? Does it help LGBTQ individuals be accepted and respected in our society? Does it take the needy and raise them up in a way that actually helps them do better in the world? So the expectation here is, yes, we will invest, we will make a little bit of money potentially, and actually the whole question of whether interest can be charged on this loan is a fascinating question. It's allowed later on in Jewish history, but not 100% clear if it was allowed in this particular moment, in this particular situation. But the end point here, I think, is to say we should be prepared for some loss at times. Not every investment will return what we think or what we want. But if you're loaning money to the poor, you can't let that be an excuse to avoid loaning or investing or joining a partnership, because ultimately that is the way you raise up the world and move the world forward in the kinds of values we care about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, Rabbi Schoenfeld, if you would walk us through text number 2, share your reflections. What does this text contribute to our discussion about impact investing?
Sure. So, we're speaking about our favorite text. This is certainly one of mine. Were it not for the Yetzer Hara, the self-centered inclination, sometimes people say the evil inclination is another translation, a person would not build, would not marry, would not have children, and would not engage in business. And this is, I think, one of the most fascinating texts. Its origin, of course, every midrash, every interpretation comes from some anomaly, some ambiguity in the original text. And here what it's commenting on in Breshit, the very beginning of the Torah, is that as we go through the creation story, right, the Torah acknowledges with each new part of creation, and it was good. Right? It was good. Each thing is created, and it is good. And then the human being is created. There's sort of a pause. No claim that the human being is good or not good. And then referring to the entire creation, right? The text says, and it was very good. So this kind of makes you wonder, right? As a whole, it's very good, but the human may be good sometimes, maybe not so good. And it really gets to the heart, part of why I've personally always found this text very inspiring. It gets to the heart that you can't just throw away the parts of yourself or somebody else or the community that you don't like and say, those are the bad parts, and I only want to deal with the good parts. Because it's all good and bad, right? And we have to be able to work with all of it, and we have to make good of all of it, right? We have to make a good totality from everything together. And so the human being, we acknowledge from the very start, Judaism does not require of us to be perfect. It does not require of us to be free of sin or free of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. To the contrary, right? We must have it. There's another girsa of the text which describes that the Yetzer Hara is put in a cage, like a caged bird. Right? And when it's in a cage, then all of these things happen. People stopped marrying. They stopped having children. They stopped building houses. They lost their ambition. The world could simply not survive without a certain amount of ambition, maybe even a certain inclination towards greed sometimes that has to be managed and controlled, without a desire, this desire that we all share to feel like we are a part of something that is big and exciting and gratifying, and the human need for our own gratification. So it's a very profound text. On the other side of it is, of course, the immeasurable suffering that comes when we can't control our Yetzer Hara, and the suffering that can be imposed on other people. And this is where the work of today becomes so important, because it is so hard to even begin to imagine the scope of the impact. We talk about impact investing, but of the impact of our investments wherever we invest them, right? On the environment, on the lives of the workers who serve the companies that we invest in, on their ability to have the kind of decent lives that I was describing that I want for the people that I'm responsible for. And so it is both a very challenging text and I think a very inspiring one, both personally and communally.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to briefly talk through text 3 and 4, and then we'll turn to Rabbi Greenberg for text 5. So text 3, the Talmud teaches us in many places that anyone who can benefit others without suffering a loss, in such a case, we require them to do so, and to avoid acting as selfish as the city of Sodom. So this text touches on one of the key debates in the impact investing field about the question of sacrificing return for impact. And it's been settled in the field that it's possible. It's clear now that it's possible to invest and achieve impact without sacrificing return. It's possible to invest at a market rate of return, investment that actually has impact. So this text starts to talk to some of that question. If that's true, then what responsibility do I have with my investments to help others? The fourth text, it is a mitzvah. It's a commandment to rebuke a fellow Jew who is acting inappropriately. At the beginning of the rebuke, it is fitting for a person to rebuke privately, with soft expressions and calm words, so that the person not be embarrassed. But there is no doubt that if they do not respond to this, that we denounce them in public and publicize their harmful act until they return to a better choice. The one rebuking is obligated to continue rebuking until the one being scolded is practically fed up enough to literally strike out at the rebuker. So this text, when we apply it not just to relationships between individuals, but also relationships that we might have with companies that we invest in, this text describes a key tactic in the field, the tactic of shareholder advocacy. We'll have a whole session on that later today. So I'm going to turn to Rabbi Greenberg to walk us through the fifth text.
Let me confess, this is not one of my most favorite texts. Actually, my colleagues got two of my favorite texts, but happy to follow them anyway. But we'll take what we can get. I think the text has an important message, which I think needs to be explored even further. The sages taught that if there's a business venture and the investing partner, meaning the one who has the money and therefore, apparently in this case, the leverage, and the managing partner, someone who's doing the actual work, in which the investor first to profit and second to loss, meaning any profit comes to him and anything left over goes to the other, but any loss goes the other way, then the investor is a wicked person. If you will, he has used his leverage excessively to load it completely in his favor. Apparently, the rabbis felt win-win is a better, healthier, ethical and business practice. Obviously, they weren't involved in making our a new tax law, but anyway, which favors, as you know, people who give it rather than manage it. Okay, if the investor, on the other hand, if an investor is first to loss and second to profit, then he's a pious person. So here is the opposite. He is, as it were, being spiritually sacrificial. He's not looking to make his money. He's really basically giving the other all the advantages. If they share their risk and reward, this is a general societal practice. In other words, both get a reasonably equal share. Fair is this is the standard business practice. The point I wanted to make was that I think we can draw two specifics for our purposes. One is that the Gemara, the tradition, the halakha, accepts the idea of general business practice and the fact, as we heard several different ways, profit motive is legitimate, self-interest is legitimate. One of the most powerful truths about covenant partnership I mentioned before is that you have a right to start with your own family, that you have a right, and in fact an obligation, to start with the poor of your own city and extend outward rather than simply say equal at every step of the way. So it recognizes the human reality. The human reality is that people working for themselves, people investing, do better, or apparently are more productive, are more effective than others. And this is something that has to be done because in the long run, when you produce more, there is more for everybody if you handle it and manage it correctly. So the tradition does recognize and accept profit and self-interest as a legitimate working principle. On the other hand, in the first two statements, it's saying the profit motive should not be absolute. It is not self-validated. The answer is, it is not Vince Lombardi that only thing that matters is winning. If you load it so winning that in fact you're being unfair and taking advantage of the side, this is a violation. I'd like to broaden, so I think that again becomes a very important precedent for what JLens is about, and I'd like to broaden it in this way. So number one is it's telling us, respect the profit motive, in fact, take advantage of it, use it, strengthen society with it, but do not give it a blank check. On the contrary, it has to be controlled, because if it's not controlled, it will lead to wicked behavior. And I would broaden that even more sharply. I think one of the most striking truths and important about JLens is that this is one of the great civilizations of all time in terms of humans taking power. There's been a tremendous outburst and creativity, and a lot of it very constructive. Humans taking power, medicine, and curing diseases and doing things that had never been done before. Humans creating wealth on a staggering scale. And the truth is, living standards worldwide have been transformed and raised. Even the poor, again, there's still 2 billion people still living on a dollar or two a day, but hundreds of millions, literally billions, have been taken from poverty into a beginning of a dignified and reasonable living standard. So this is a tremendous accomplishment, and one could, in every area, taking power has led to remarkable breakthroughs. I mean, women, equality, we don't have to go through the whole list, but so this is something to be celebrated, but, and here's the catch, we're living in a time where that power has become so staggering and so powerful that we're beginning to get the side effect question of collateral damage. In other words, humans by numbers have reached such numbers that in fact there is a danger that in providing for their food you disrupt or despoil the planet and desertify, et cetera, et cetera. So my point is, the affirmation of the profit margin now has to be matched by the challenge that it's not absolute and it's not self-validating, and when it has negative consequences, then it must be corrected and taken under control. And of course, that's what we're seeing now in terms of, again, the reckless investment forms that created mineral developments that pollute and toxify. We've seen what happened in South America and Indonesia and so on, where the forests are totally being wiped out, endangering the local population, its ability to function, but also the planet itself. So this is where I think the JLens theme has to come in, and the Jewish people have a contribution to make to the whole world. And it's not just for ourselves. And I appreciated Julie's comment about we can have interfaith activity in this area, but it's beyond interfaith too. The whole world needs this reminder that matched with human power and human responsibility and human breakthroughs and human achievement of every form has to come the covenantal, the partnership concept of limits, responsibility, correction of excesses, that power does corrupt, absolute power does corrupt absolutely, and our task therefore is not to abolish power, not to fight it, but to transform it, control it, reshape it. And what the lens says is the power of investment and the tremendous wealth it has generated in this country and other places can be and should be measured and pushed and molded so that in fact we reduce, if not eliminate, the side effects and no longer can justify investment, particularly in weaker groups that we take advantage of to invest and make profit at their expense or at their environment's expense. And this is what I think is the moment that we're all wrestling with, the Jewish people not only participating as free in America or as a nation sovereign in Israel, but the Jewish people have a chance to show, I think, a model of power with responsibility for the whole world.
Thank you very much. So we're going to take a couple of quick questions. We're going to take one question. So throughout the summit, here's how questions will work. We'll have staff members moving up and down the aisle. So if you have a question, raise your hand. They'll come to you. And throughout the summit, please keep your questions concise because we do have a packed agenda. So go ahead. Rabbi Ratner is with somebody over there.
Hi, Boker Tov, Yossi Abramowitz. Both of you represent institutions, and Julie spoke so passionately about your responsibility as a trustee of the pensions. I'm wondering what issues through a Jewish lens would be the first ones that you could potentially begin screening for? And then the second part of the question is, there's a concept of stranded assets when it comes to fossil fuels. like coal lost a lot of value and portfolios went down. Would you be willing to have your portfolios of the rabbinic pension funds screened for fossil fuels? If someone who's willing to do it, and also show you maybe the danger to your portfolio in terms of stranded assets.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. We're going to take one more. We'll take them as a pair, and then we'll have our panelists respond at the end. So Rachel has a question.
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Julie and JLens, for this. Regarding text 4, and this may be connected with Yosef's question, in addition to individual companies, do we also have an obligation to look inside our portfolios for countries that may be acting against American interests or interest in Israel? Many people don't know this, but within Jewish communal funds, we have investments in countries like Qatar and Pakistan and enemies of Israel. So that would seem to be relevant to text 4.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to very briefly touch on either of those questions. I will also mention that we'll have a panel coming up on Jewish institutions leading the way that can talk to some of these questions that Yossi raised about screening and also shareholder advocacy. And so we'll hear some more about some of those practicals also later in the day. But let's hear from our panel, whichever question you want to address, and we'll just do it quickly. Somebody want to start? Thank you, Rabbi Penkin.
Sure, no problem. First of all, I'm lucky that I actually am not the trustee of the pension fund for the Reform Movement, so I don't know what exactly is going on in there, frankly, though there are people probably in the room who would be able to talk about that. Let me say two things along the line, Yossi, of what you said and also what the gentleman over here said. I think there's a role of profit and the role of profit. And I think actually both of those have to go hand in hand. And what I mean by that is, you can pursue profit at any cost, and people do that all the time in investments, unfortunately. And then you have to have that little prophetic voice inside you that says, I really shouldn't be investing in coal. I really shouldn't be investing in, Venezuela maybe, or, other countries in the world where really it's probably not a thoughtful, a good choice to invest right now. And I will tell you that the boardrooms in which I have sat, where we talk about those issues, they're very difficult issues because there are people who sit in those rooms who say, the goal here is yield, right? That's what I want, right? That's what we want for our institution. And the truth is that many institutions are actually created around an investment plan that funds what they do on a daily basis. And the question is, are you willing to take the hit on potential yield, which sometimes you have to if you make those decisions, potentially, though others would disagree with that idea. But I'm telling you what I'm hearing from people. Some people will say, are you willing to take that hit? Do you think that's the right thing to do or not? And that's the argument that goes on all the time in investment committees. And I will say that there's a lot of education. That's where the role of the prophet, P-R-O-P-H-E-T, can come in, where we have to be teaching people about the possibilities that exist. And I don't think that we've done quite what the Jewish community can do in that area, and I'm very happy to be part of moving that forward because I think that's the right thing to be doing. Last comment, I think, is this has to be a process, I think, and it has to be something that will take a while because the attitudes that I come into contact with, as we probably all do, don't always accept the idea. I mean, I've had this conversation a number of times. They don't always accept the idea that if we invest in socially responsible or impact kinds of investments, we're not, the conception out there in a lot of people's minds is still that will not provide the return that they need. And I think we have to do a lot of work to fix that. I think that's really important to work on.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut our other panelists off. I see my colleagues pushing us ahead because we have a packed agenda, so I apologize for that. But thank you all for sharing your insights and your wisdom, and I'm really honored to sit up here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists.